The morning rush at Bluebird Cafe was chaos wrapped in sunlight. The smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the sweetness of pancakes, and the low hum of conversation filled every corner. Lila Carter moved between tables with her usual quiet grace, balancing trays and smiles in equal measure. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her apron pocket filled with scribbled orders, and her sneakers carried the fatigue of double shifts. She wasn't supposed to be here today. It was her one day off. But when her coworker called in sick, she said yes without hesitation. Rent was due, her mom's medication wasn't cheap, and the dream of finishing college was a memory she couldn't afford to chase right now. "Lila," her manager called from behind the counter. "Table 9's asking for refills." "On it," she replied with a practiced smile. As she walked toward the corner booth, a sharp voice cut through the cafe. "Excuse me? Are you even paying attention?" A businessman in a tailored suit sat near the window, tapping his expensive watch impatiently. His laptop was open, his tone dripping with condescension. "Sorry, sir," Lila said softly. "Just finishing up another table." He scoffed. "If you spent less time chatting and more time working, maybe this place wouldn't be so slow." She swallowed hard. "I'll get your refill right away." The man didn't even look at her when he muttered, "Typical." The word stung, typical, like she was a stereotype in his world. She turned, took a deep breath, and carried on. She'd learned long ago that pride didn't pay bills. After the lunch rush faded, the cafe quieted down. Lila was counting her tips when she noticed a man sitting outside on the curb. His clothes were worn, his beard untrimmed, and his hands were folded tightly like he was holding on to what little dignity he had left. He wasn't asking for money, just sitting there, staring at the ground. Something in Lila's chest tightened. She'd seen hundreds of people pass by him, most pretending he didn't exist. She looked down at her handful of crumpled bills. $28.50 in tips. Not much, but enough for a few groceries. Her hand hesitated. Then she grabbed a coffee cup and a sandwich, stepped outside, and walked up to him. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" The man looked up, startled. His eyes were tired but sharp. "I'm fine, ma'am. Just resting." She smiled. "You look like you could use something warm." She handed him the cup and sandwich. He blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to." He took them slowly, his hands trembling. "Thank you. You're the first person who's stopped today." Lila shrugged, her voice soft. "Everyone deserves a little kindness." He smiled faintly. Not the kind of smile that came easily, but the kind that came from remembering what hope felt like. Before walking back inside, Lila reached into her apron pocket and pulled out all her tips. She hesitated for half a second, then pressed the bills into his hand. "Please," she said, "use it for whatever you need." He stared at her like she'd handed him the moon. "Miss, that's too much." "It's just money," she replied. "I'll make more tomorrow." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, "I won't forget this." Lila smiled. "You don't have to." When she went back inside, her manager frowned. "You gave that man money again?" "Yeah." "You're too soft, Lila. People like him, they don't change." She wiped her hands on her apron, glancing out the window at the man sipping his coffee like it was the first good thing he'd had in years. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I'd rather be too soft than too cold." That night, she walked home through the city lights, her worn sneakers slapping against the pavement. Every storefront reflected fragments of her life. The girl who smiled for everyone, even when she was breaking inside. Her apartment was small but warm. A photo of her and her mother sat on the counter, her mom's smile brighter than her health had ever been. Lila kissed the frame. "One day, Mom," she whispered, "I'll give you a better life." She didn't know that one day would come sooner than she ever imagined, and not in a way she could have predicted. 2 weeks later, the cafe was buzzing again. this time with an unfamiliar energy. Lila arrived early, tying her apron as her manager hurried over. "Big day today," he whispered. "We've got some corporate people coming in, investors apparently. Some big companies doing a meeting here before their event downtown." "Investors? Here?" Lila raised an eyebrow. Why would a company choose a tiny cafe for a meeting? "No idea," he said, fixing his tie nervously. "Just smile and keep the coffee coming. They said the chairman himself is attending." Lila laughed under her breath. Right? Because billionaires love pancakes and sticky menus. But when the black car pulled up outside, she stopped laughing. The man who stepped out wasn't what she expected. He wasn't young or loud or surrounded by security. He wore a dark tailored suit, yes, but there was something familiar in the way he looked around, like every detail mattered to him. He stepped into the cafe, scanning the room with quiet eyes. Lila's chest tightened as their gazes met. She froze, the tray slipping in her hand. It was the same man from the sidewalk. The homeless man she'd given her tip to. He smiled. Not the broken smile from before, but one of composure and gratitude. He gave a polite nod to the staff before saying, "I believe we have a reservation for Mr. Andrew Blake and Associates." Lila's manager practically tripped over himself. "Of course, sir. Right this way. Andrew Blake." The name echoed in Lila's head like thunder. She knew that name, everyone did. The founder of Blake Industries, a global investment firm. She stood frozen as he passed, his expression calm but his eyes pausing briefly on hers. A quiet acknowledgement, a secret between two worlds. Her heart raced. She wanted to say something, but words wouldn't come. Andrew smiled faintly and said to her almost softly, "Good to see you again, Miss Carter." Lila's breath caught. He remembered her name. She didn't even know he knew it. And as he took a seat at the corner table, surrounded by executives and investors in designer suits, Lila realized something that made her hands tremble. The man she'd once helped with her last $20 was about to change her life forever. Lila could feel her heartbeat echo in her ears as she watched Andrew Blake, the man she'd once thought was homeless, sip his coffee like he owned the air itself. He didn't seem like the same man who had sat shivering on the sidewalk 2 weeks ago. His beard was trimmed, his clothes were immaculate, and his voice carried quiet authority when he spoke. Her manager hovered nervously by the counter, constantly adjusting his tie. "That's the Andrew Blake," he whispered to the barista. "Blake Industries, billion-dollar valuation. I can't believe he's actually here." Lila tried to focus on her work, but her hands were trembling. Every clink of a coffee cup sounded louder than usual. She kept glancing over to the corner booth where Andrew sat with 3 executives. The conversation sounded intense, but his demeanor remained calm, even kind. He didn't bark orders or dominate the room. He listened. And every so often, when he looked up, his gaze drifted to her, as though remembering something important. At one point, their eyes met. He gave her the faintest nod, almost a thank you without words. Lila quickly looked away, her cheeks flushed. She moved between tables, refilling cups, taking orders, pretending her heart wasn't racing. But she couldn't shake one thought. Why didn't he tell me who he was that day? When the meeting ended, her manager nearly sprinted to Andrew's table. "Mr. Blake, sir. Thank you for visiting Bluebird Cafe. It's an honor." Andrew smiled warmly. "It's a lovely place. Quiet. Genuine. You don't see many of those anymore." He placed his card on the table. "Send me your menu digitally. I might have some ideas for you." Then, as he stood to leave, he turned to Lila. "Miss Carter," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" The cafe seemed to freeze. Her co-workers stared as she wiped her hands nervously on her apron and approached him. "Yes, sir?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, not like a CEO sizing up an employee, but like someone seeing a person who mattered. "Do you still walk home after work?" She blinked, confused. Yes, sir. It's not far. He nodded. I'll have a car waiting outside tonight. Please take it. Her eyebrows furrowed. I don't think that's a favor, he interrupted gently. No, it's gratitude. Lila opened her mouth to protest, but his tone was kind, firm and final. Before leaving, he handed her a small envelope. Don't open this until you're home. And then he was gone, slipping back into the world of suits, chauffeurs, and luxury cars like he'd never been the man on the curb at all. That night, after closing the cafe, Lila stood outside under the streetlight, staring at the sleek black car waiting for her. The driver stepped out, holding the door open respectfully. Miss Carter? He asked. She hesitated before nodding. That's me. The ride was silent except for the hum of the city outside. Her heart wouldn't stop pounding. When she reached her small apartment, she thanked the driver and hurried upstairs. Her hands were shaking as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note and a check. She froze when she saw the amount. $25,000. She dropped the envelope onto the table, her breath catching in her throat. The note read, "Kindness is the rarest currency. You spent it without expecting return, and that's why it's worth everything. Andrew Blake." Her legs gave out, and she sank into the chair, tears filling her eyes. For years she'd fought to keep her head above water, working endless hours, sacrificing her dreams, convincing herself that kindness didn't pay. And now, because of one simple act, everything had changed. She called her mom, voice trembling. "Mom, I think our luck just turned around." 2 weeks later, the cafe buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't about a celebrity visit. Lila's manager gathered everyone together after their shifts. "Big news," he announced. "Bluebird Cafe's getting new investors. Someone's buying the franchise and expanding it across the city. Apparently, they were impressed with our authenticity." Everyone murmured excitedly. Lila smiled faintly but stayed quiet. Later that week, she was called into the cafe on her day off. When she walked in, she froze. Andrew Blake was there again. This time with 2 assistants, a portfolio in his hand, and that same calm presence that made the entire room feel smaller. Her manager stood beside him, smiling nervously. "Lila, Mr. Blake has requested to see you personally." She walked up slowly. "Sir." Andrew gestured for her to sit. "Lila, I've been thinking about you." Her eyes widened. "About me?" He nodded. "About people like you. People who do the right thing even when nobody's watching. You're the reason I chose this cafe for my company's new initiative." He opened the folder, showing a document with the words, "Bluebird Community Program," on it. "We're investing in small cafes and restaurants," he explained. "But we're not just hiring managers. We're hiring partners, people we trust, people with integrity." Her heart pounded. "What does that have to do with me?" Andrew smiled. "You're going to help us run it." Her breath hitched. "Run it?" "Yes," he said simply. "Starting next month, you'll be working with our operations team. I want you to bring the same humanity you showed me that day to every cafe we open." Lila's throat tightened. "But I'm just a waitress." He shook his head. "You're the reason this entire project exists. Titles don't define leadership, Miss Carter. Actions do." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." Andrew's smile softened. "You already said it when you handed me that sandwich and a cup of coffee." She laughed through her tears. "I thought you were homeless." He chuckled quietly. "So did everyone else." Then his voice grew softer. "I wasn't testing anyone. I'd lost my company in a merger battle. My identity, my purpose, everything. I walked the streets for weeks trying to remember who I was. And then you saw me. You didn't see a failure. You saw a person." Lila's hand covered her mouth. You were serious that day." He nodded. "Your kindness reminded me what mattered, and it gave me the clarity to fight back, to rebuild." The room was silent except for the hum of the espresso machine. Lila wiped her tears and smiled. Then I guess we both rebuilt something. Andrew stood and offered his hand. Together, we'll build something even bigger. That night, as she walked home under the glow of streetlights, Lila thought about how one small choice, one moment of compassion, had altered both their lives. She looked up at the city skyline, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that kindness was never wasted, because sometimes the smallest act of good was the start of something extraordinary. The following month arrived faster than Lila expected. One morning, she found herself standing in front of the towering glass headquarters of Blake Industries, the sun reflecting off its mirrored surface like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. Her heart pounded as she stared at her reflection in the glass doors. The same girl who used to balance trays and dodge rude customers was now wearing a tailored blazer and holding a visitor's badge with her name printed neatly. Lila Carter, Community Relations Consultant. The security guard at the entrance greeted her kindly. First day. She nodded nervously. Is it that obvious? He chuckled. Everyone looks like that their first day here. You'll be fine. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, soft music, the scent of expensive coffee. It all felt like another world. She walked through the lobby, clutching the folder Andrew's assistant had given her, repeating his words in her head. Don't try to be someone else, Lila. We brought you here because of who you already are. Still, she couldn't help but feel out of place among the polished professionals moving with purpose and confidence. A receptionist guided her to the top floor. Mr. Blake's waiting for you in the boardroom. Her stomach twisted. Boardroom? Yes, ma'am. You're on the agenda today. Lila froze. On the agenda? Before she could protest, the elevator doors slid open to reveal a panoramic view of the city. The hallway stretched toward a set of tall double doors made of dark oak. Behind them, she could hear low murmurs and the occasional polite laugh. The receptionist smiled reassuringly. Good luck. Lila took a deep breath and stepped inside. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and light. A long polished table gleamed under recessed lighting. Around it sat a dozen executives in tailored suits, their faces composed and analytical. At the head of the table sat Andrew Blake, calm, confident, and focused. He stood as she entered. Everyone, this is Lila Carter. She's joining us as our community relations consultant for the Bluebird Initiative. Some of the board members offered polite smiles. Others looked skeptical. An older man near the end of the table raised an eyebrow. A waitress? He said quietly, though not quiet enough. Andrew glanced at him. A woman who understands people better than most of us, he corrected evenly. That's exactly what this company needs. Lila felt her pulse race. Andrew gestured toward a seat beside him. Have a seat, Miss Carter. She sat down, clutching her notepad, feeling every pair of eyes on her. The meeting began, discussions about expansion plans, investment opportunities, cost projections. It all sounded like another language. She took notes quietly, trying to keep up. Then, midway through the meeting, one of the executives, a woman in a sleek black suit, leaned toward Andrew. Sir, with respect, what exactly qualifies Miss Carter to contribute to corporate strategy? The question sliced through the room. Lila's stomach twisted. Andrew didn't flinch. Experience, he said simply. Not in finance, in humanity. Something we seem to forget has value. He turned to Lila. Miss Carter, tell them what you told me about that cafe. Her throat felt dry. I don't really. Andrew's gaze was steady, reassuring. Just tell the truth. Lila looked around the table, every executive waiting. She took a breath. I was just doing my job, she began quietly. Serving people. But what I saw every day was how differently people treated one another. Like kindness depended on what you were wearing or how much money you had. That's why I treated everyone the same. Not because I wanted tips or approval, but because I wanted to go home at night and feel like I hadn't lost myself. The room was silent. She looked down for a moment, then continued, her voice stronger now. You can't build a business on money alone. You build it on people. And if you forget that, everything else eventually falls apart. Andrew smiled faintly. Exactly. The skeptical executive leaned back in her chair, clearly unsure how to respond. Andrew tapped the table lightly. That's why Lila is here. To remind us what integrity looks like when it's not wearing a suit. A few quiet nods followed. The tension eased slightly. For the rest of the meeting, Andrew occasionally asked Lila for her perspective. She didn't know every business term, but she spoke from the heart. About customers, workers, and small cafe owners who needed opportunity, not pity. By the time the meeting ended, the same executives who had doubted her were watching her differently. As they filed out, the older man who'd questioned her earlier paused by her chair. You spoke well, he said curtly. Better than some of us who've been here 20 years. Lila smiled. Thank you, sir. When the room emptied, Andrew turned to her. How do you feel? She laughed nervously. Like I ran a marathon in heels. He chuckled. You did perfectly. That's exactly why I wanted them to hear you. You didn't talk like them. You talked like yourself. She looked at him curiously. Why me though? You could have picked anyone. Andrew leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Because when I was sitting on that curb, nobody saw me. Nobody asked my name. Nobody cared. Except you. You didn't see a problem, you saw a person. And that's leadership, Lila. Not power, perspective. Her chest tightened. You make it sound like I changed your life. He smiled softly. You reminded me what it meant to have one. That evening, Lila stood outside the towering building again, staring up at the glowing logo of Blake Industries. The city lights shimmered across the glass, and in the reflection, she saw not just herself, but who she'd become. She thought about all the nights she'd walked home from the cafe with sore feet and a tired heart, believing the world didn't see her. Now, the same world had opened its doors. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't luck. It was proof that small kindnesses don't disappear. They echo. And sometimes those echoes reach the top floor of a skyscraper. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, training sessions, and late-night emails. Lila was learning fast corporate language, business plans, funding structures. But what she learned most was that kindness and ambition didn't always share the same table. Many of the executives were polite to her face but cold behind her back. She could feel it. The dismissive glances, the whispers when she walked by, the subtle smirks whenever she spoke up in meetings. It wasn't everyone. Some respected her, especially the younger team members who saw her humility as refreshing. But others couldn't accept that a former waitress had a seat in their world. One of them was Victor Hale, a senior partner with sharp eyes and a sharper ego. He was the kind of man who measured worth in designer suits and car brands, not character. At first, Victor pretended to be friendly, offering advice, complimenting her ideas, but something about his smile never reached his eyes. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, Victor spoke up. Mr. Blake, if we're going to invest millions into this community project, we need proper leadership. With respect to Miss Carter, she doesn't have the experience to manage a national rollout. The room went silent. Andrew glanced at Lila. Miss Carter isn't managing the rollout. She's shaping its purpose. Without her, this project wouldn't exist. Victor smirked slightly. Purpose doesn't balance ledgers. Emotion doesn't drive profit. Lila's hands tightened around her pen. Maybe not, she said quietly. But compassion drives loyalty, and loyalty builds everything profit can't buy. Some people around the table nodded in agreement, but Victor didn't look convinced. He leaned back, crossing his arms. We'll see if compassion keeps our investors happy. Andrew's voice was calm but firm. It will. Because we're not just building a business, we're rebuilding trust. And Lila knows that better than anyone. Victor said nothing more, but his eyes told a different story. A few days later, while Lila was reviewing reports in her small office, her email pinged. Subject: Urgent, board review preparation. It was from Victor. Need you to handle tomorrow's financial presentation. Mr. Blake is unavailable. If this fails, the project's future is uncertain. VH. Lila's stomach dropped. Financial presentation? She wasn't trained for that. Still, she couldn't ignore it. She spent the entire night watching tutorials, reading balance sheets, trying to understand the numbers. By morning, her eyes burned from lack of sleep. When she walked into the boardroom the next day, the atmosphere was colder than usual. The lights dimmed, a projector flickered on, and the board members watched her expectantly. Victor smiled faintly from across the table. Miss Carter, please, the floor is yours. Lila stepped forward, palms sweating, her voice shaking slightly as she began to speak. Good morning. As you know, the Bluebird initiative is designed to... She clicked the remote, and the screen went blank. The next slide missing. The data file was gone. Her heart raced. I had the data here last night. Victor sighed loudly. Miss Carter, are you suggesting we move forward without evidence of the project's viability? I had the files, she stammered. Someone... Enough! Victor cut her off smoothly. This is exactly why I warned you, Mr. Blake. She's a kind heart, yes, but this isn't a charity. It's a company. Lila stood frozen. The humiliation burned through her chest. Before Andrew could respond, Victor continued, We can't afford emotional decisions. I recommend we pause this initiative until someone more experienced takes over. For a moment, the room felt miles away. Lila's mind spun. The faces blurred. The air felt heavy. But then she heard Andrew's voice. Calm, steady, resolute. Victor, he said. That won't be necessary. The room fell silent. Andrew stood and turned toward Lila. Miss Carter, I believe in your work. We'll reschedule this presentation for next week. My assistant will help you rebuild the file. He looked directly at Victor. And in the future, if anyone here intentionally undermines a project, they'll answer to me. Victor's smirk faltered for the first time. Lila swallowed hard. Thank you, sir. Andrew nodded. You've got this. I know you do. After the meeting, Lila sat in her office, staring at her screen. The humiliation lingered, but so did something else, resolve. She replayed Victor's words over and over, letting them fuel her determination. She spent the next week rebuilding everything from scratch, stronger, clearer, more detailed. She even added community testimonials from cafe owners across the city who had already benefited from small grants under the pilot program. By the time the next presentation came, she was ready. She stood before the boardroom again, no tremor in her voice, no hesitation in her hands. This isn't just a project, she said. It's proof that giving opportunity to the right people changes lives, and those people, in turn, build loyalty that no advertisement ever could. Bluebird isn't about charity. It's about growth that's human, not just profitable. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Andrew smiled proudly. That's the kind of leadership this company stands for. Even Victor, though tight-lipped, was forced to clap. As the meeting adjourned, Andrew leaned toward her and whispered, I told you you could do it. Lila smiled through tears. I just needed someone to remind me. That evening, as she stepped out of the building, the sun was setting over the skyline, golden light washing over the glass towers. She took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You did well today. Keep standing tall. VH. She frowned but smiled faintly. Maybe even those who doubted her were starting to see what Andrew had seen all along. What Lila didn't know was that the story wasn't over yet. Because the next morning, she'd find herself standing in the same boardroom, but this time not as an employee. The twist waiting for her would shock the entire company. The next morning began like any other, or so Lila thought. She arrived at the Blake Industries tower early, the smell of fresh coffee still lingering in the lobby. Employees hurried past with their lanyards and tablets, nodding politely as she stepped into the elevator. But something felt different. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet anticipation, whispers echoing between hallways. When she reached the top floor, Andrew's assistant met her outside his office, beaming. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Mr. Blake asked me to escort you to the main auditorium." "The auditorium?" Lila blinked. "Why?" The assistant's smile only widened. "You'll see." Her pulse quickened as she followed down the corridor lined with framed photos of Blake Industries milestones. Award ceremonies, new offices, charity projects. Every image told the story of a company built on innovation and legacy. But today, something new was about to be added. When the auditorium doors opened, Lila froze. Hundreds of employees filled the seats, cameras were set up at the back, and at the center of the stage stood Andrew Blake. He was addressing the audience with calm authority, his voice echoing through the hall. And that's why, moving forward, we're redefining what leadership looks like in this company. He spotted Lila in the doorway and gestured for her to come up. Her legs felt heavy as she walked toward the stage under the glare of lights and curious eyes. Andrew smiled warmly. "Everyone, this is Lila Carter. Some of you already know her, the woman who helped shape the Bluebird Initiative into what it is today." The audience applauded politely. Lila gave a nervous smile, unsure why she was being brought on stage. Andrew continued, "When I met Lila, she wasn't sitting in an office or a meeting room. She was behind the counter of a small cafe, serving customers with a grace that no paycheck can buy. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask. All she did was treat me with kindness when no one else would." A ripple of surprise spread through the audience. Cameras clicked. Lila's heart pounded as Andrew looked at her with quiet pride. "That simple act," he said, "changed the course of this company's future, because it reminded me of something I had forgotten, that humanity is the greatest investment of all." He turned toward her fully now. "Lila Carter, you didn't just inspire a project. You inspired a movement. From this day forward, you are officially the Director of Community Development at Blake Industries." The room erupted in applause. Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she whispered. Andrew smiled. "Say yes." The audience laughed warmly. Lila blinked back tears and nodded. "Then yes." The applause grew louder. Reporters took photos as Andrew handed her an embossed folder, her official appointment letter. Then, unexpectedly, Andrew raised his hand to quiet the room. His tone grew more personal. "I never told you all the truth," he said softly. "When I walked into that cafe last year, I wasn't a CEO. I had just lost everything. A hostile takeover, legal battles, betrayal from people I trusted. I wandered those streets feeling invisible. But she saw me. She reminded me that worth doesn't vanish when the world stops seeing it. That's why this company will never overlook the people who make it run." He paused, his eyes glistening. "And that's a promise from both of us." The applause became a standing ovation. Lila turned, overwhelmed by emotion, catching sight of Victor in the crowd. Even he was clapping now, nodding in quiet respect. That evening, after the event, Lila found herself alone on the rooftop terrace. The sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the city in gold and amber. She leaned against the railing, still trying to process everything that had happened. Footsteps approached behind her. "I knew you'd come up here," Andrew said, his tone light. "You always liked quiet places." She smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard." He stood beside her, looking out at the horizon. "How does it feel?" "Unreal," she admitted. "Yesterday, I was nervous about losing my job. Today, I have an office." Andrew chuckled softly. That's life. It changes when you least expect it. They stood in silence for a while, the city humming below. Finally, Lila spoke. Why me, Andrew? Out of everyone you could have chosen, why put so much faith in me? He turned to her, eyes soft. Because you didn't see what the world told you to see. You looked at a man sitting on the curb and saw a human being. That kind of vision, it's rare. And it's exactly what this world needs more of. Lila felt tears sting her eyes again. You know, when I gave you that coffee, I thought I was helping you. But you're the one who changed my life. He smiled gently. Maybe we just reminded each other of what matters. She laughed quietly. Kindness. He nodded. Always kindness. Months passed. Under Lila's leadership, the Bluebird initiative grew faster than anyone predicted. The program partnered with local cafes, diners, and small-town businesses, helping them upgrade, hire, and thrive. News outlets called her the waitress who changed corporate America. One day, as she walked through the very same cafe where it all began, she noticed a young waitress struggling to carry 2 trays at once. The girl looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and invisible, just as Lila once had. Lila stepped forward, caught one of the trays before it could fall, and smiled. Careful. I've been there. The girl laughed shyly. Thanks, ma'am. People can be rough some days. They can, Lila said. But don't let them change who you are. As she walked out, she left a generous tip on the counter, folded inside a small note that read, "One act of kindness can change your entire story." Later that night, Lila stood again on the rooftop of Blake Industries, gazing at the city lights below. The reflection in the glass showed a woman who had gone from forgotten to fearless, not because she chased power, but because she chose compassion. Her voice echoed softly in the wind as she whispered to herself, "Never underestimate what a simple act can build." And down in the streets, under the same city lights where their story began, a man sat quietly outside a cafe, holding a cup of coffee someone had just bought for him. He looked up, smiled, and said softly, "Kindness comes back around."